Hi there, my name's Catherine. I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining me today. For today's video, I've basically come up with a concept so that I can talk about some of my favourite horror films that have come out in recent years. I have basically come up with some random categories to do with horror films myself so that I have an excuse to talk about some of my favourite horror films that have come out in recent years. That's not to say I don't love older horror films, I absolutely do, but everyone already knows about The Shining and Psycho and Silence of the Lambs. We all can agree that they are amazing masterpieces of the horror film genre. I wanted to talk about some more recent films that I think have really positively changed the horror genre, modernized it. So without further ado, let's begin.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
Favorite scary movie is such a difficult one because I feel like there's been so many good horror movies coming out in recent years. I'm gonna mention The Witch, I'm gonna mention Get Out, but there was one that was just, for me personally, was everything I love wrapped up into one film, and that is Ari Aster's Midsommar. I think most people have seen this film or at least heard of it. Midsommar is a folk horror film that stars Florence Pugh as our main character Danny, who is suffering the after effects of a tremendous family trauma, and she decides to accompany her boyfriend and his group of friends to rural Sweden so they can partake in a midsummer festival. The trip soon devolves into a living nightmare as the group of friends soon realises they've stepped into a cult who practices pagan rituals and they have no means of escape. This film has an amazing cast. Obviously Florence Pugh is in it, but also Ari Aster, who directed Hereditary, which is also a stunning film, and honestly it was a tight competition between these two films as to which I would put as the best horror movie in recent years. Ari Aster directs it, and I particularly love the cinematography of this film. I love the lighting throughout. The whole film is set in the daylight. The Midsummer Festival takes place on a day where the sun never really sets, so the whole film is lit up in these bright colours and the sun shining down, which is so unusual for a horror film. You would think maybe it would make it harder for a film to be scarier if you can't rely on having darkness, but it totally works. There's something so uneasy about the sun shining down on them, beating down this oppressiveness throughout the film as this sunny cult is practicing these kind of archaic, gruesome, grotesque rituals around them. It's also really fun because it doesn't always portray the cult in a bad way. One of my favourite scenes in the film is where Florence Pugh has seen something really horrifying and she begins to have a sort of panic attack and breaks down and is sobbing and struggling to breathe, and this group of women just surround her and start mimicking her screams and her breathing, and it becomes a kind of shared pain between these women that is really visceral to watch on screen. You kind of find yourself kind of moving along with them, and I thought it was just quite an interesting thing to put in the film because you're obviously shown that these people are doing bad things, but you also feel for Danny so much, and throughout the film you're kind of getting so annoyed at her boyfriend and his group of friends for not really listening to her or sympathising or empathising with her grief, that it's just like a breath of relief to have these women surround her and just kind of actually feel with her and feel for her. This film is really disturbing, but it's gorgeous. It explores themes of grief really well, and I just love it completely.
The census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Best horror film to watch on a date is a difficult one for me because I married a man who hates horror films. He scares very easily, so whenever I watch a horror, it is not with him. I don't go on dates that involve horror films. But for my purposes, I'm going to assume that you're going on a date where both parties likes horror, and I'm going to choose Luca Guadagnino's Bones and All, which was released last year, for this category because Yes, it's a gory, grotesque film about cannibals, but more than that, it is a coming-of-age, first love romance. I will die on this hill. So yes, Bones and All is a cannibal romance starring Taylor Russell as Marin and Timothy Chalamet as Lee, who live on the fringes of society but who find each other and find love with each other and learn to survive with each other despite their innate craving of human flesh. I'm going to recommend this film to watch on a date with the note that it is extremely gory. It doesn't hold back with the scenes of eating people, especially with the sound design involved in that. You really hear the squelching of blood and the snapping of bones and such. So it's not for the weak stomach, so maybe just check with your partner that you're both going into this okay. But I do think it's a good film for a date because I think above all else it is a coming of age romance. It's the story of a girl who's experiencing her first love and finding her place in a world that is not built to accept someone like her. It's got a fun road trip element to it. It's set in the American Midwest, I think, so it's got lots of nice scenery in the background, lots of like farmland that they drive through. It's got a beautiful soundtrack, and I think it is a good blend of romance and horror, so definitely check this out if you can stomach the gore.
Listen to them, children of the night. What music they make.
For best horror soundtrack, I've cheated and I've chosen 2 films, but I don't care because I've made this up myself and I wanted to talk about both films. The first film I'm going to mention is another Luca Guadagnino. Who knew this man who directed Call Me By Your Name would start releasing such amazing horror films? Suspiria is a dance horror film and is an adaptation of Dario Argento's 1977 film, also called Suspiria. The film follows an American dancer called Susie who moves to Berlin to join a world-renowned dance company. This is a dream come true for Susie, but there is something sinister and violent and witchy lurking behind the mirrored walls of these dance studios. I think dance horror is one of my favourite subgenres of horror. I really want to see Climax that came out a few years ago. I've never seen it, but I've heard so much about it. It's just not on streaming anywhere right now. But anyway, yeah, I love films that incorporate dance into horror. I think it's a really interesting way to showcase body horror, which this film does so much of. It's got one of the most disturbing deaths I've ever seen on horror. It's really stuck with me, involving hooks. The music in this film is stunning. It was composed by Tom York from Radiohead and it is so eerie and so beautiful, and it has these haunting melodies that drift throughout the film and transport you into this other world. Tom York actually said of this film, "There's a way of repeating in music that can hypnotise. I kept thinking to myself that it's a form of making spells. So when I was working in my studio, I was making spells." I thought that was such an interesting quote, considering that this film is about witches in a dance studio who are performing these spells. So I really appreciate that Tom York kind of incorporated that into his music, and I really think that you can hear that. The other film I wanted to mention the soundtrack of is another brilliant film, Jordan Peele's Us, which came out in 2019. I love Jordan Peele so much. I think he's one of the best directors around at the moment, and I truly think that when he released Get Out, it really was a turning point in the horror genre. I think it really breathed new life into it and kickstarted a new wave of horror films. I think it's influenced the way filmmakers make their films now, and his films are so well crafted in every way. But I think specifically soundtracks are used in his films in a really interesting way because he uses modern and quite nostalgic feeling music and incorporates it into his films and makes it feel really fresh, I think. So Us is a psychological horror about a family who go on holiday to their beach house, but on their first night they are attacked by another family all dressed in red jumpsuits who look exactly like them. This film actually incorporates dance horror into it too. Our main character, the mother in the family, was a dancer when she was younger, and there is an amazing scene towards the end of the film where There's this fight sequence which incorporates dance into it that she has with her doppelganger. It's amazing, stunning and terrifying. And I really just wanted to mention this film as well because Peele and the composer he worked with, Michael Abels, what I was saying before about the incorporating more modern music and nostalgic music into films makes it fresh. In Us, they incorporate the song Get Five on It into the film throughout. The song is a R&B song from the 90s, I think, and they first play it at the beginning in the car with the family, but it becomes like a musical motif throughout the film, but Abel's like gradually adapts it and warps it into like a more ominous and sinister song where it's recognizable that it is the song, but instead of feeling nostalgic it feels absolutely blood curdling because he adds in things like screeching strings and echoing vocals. There's also other musical moments throughout the film where Peele uses a piece of popular music during a really tense scene or something gory or horrific to kind of break the tension, and I think he does it so well. He's like a master of it.
He's gonna laugh and they're all gonna laugh at you.
Best comedy horror took me a while to think of because I really wanted to pick films that had come out quite recently. So I ended up going for The Menu, which came out last year and starred Ralph Fiennes, Anya Taylor-Joy and Nicholas Hoult, among others. The Men follows a mixed group of people from elite and upper class backgrounds who travel to a remote island where a renowned chef has prepared them a meal full of courses that they are sure to never forget. This film is dark comedy. It's got some really standout performances, particularly from Nicholas Hoult, who I think has just become one of the greatest comedy actors that we have at the moment. Between this film and his work on the TV show The Great, I think he's always really good at playing insufferable characters who are actually really funny without meaning to be. This film is a great horror film in general. It's got some good shocking moments, it's got a riveting storyline, and it's a kind of satire of like the attitudes and lifestyles of the upper classes. Yeah, I think it was a really fun film, and it was much funnier than I thought it was going to be going in, but very entertaining, a really good ride.
I see dead people.
For Best Ghosts, I've chosen Hill House LLC, which was released in 2015. It takes place 5 years after 15 people were killed in an accident that takes place during a haunted house tour. And it follows a documentary crew as they have found the footage of the people that were putting on the haunted house leading up to the events and the events themselves on the night of the accident. I think this film is the best found footage film I've ever seen. It is so scary. I don't know if I could watch it on my own, and the ghosts in it are horrifying. There's not much more I can say about it really. It's just got so many jump scares, it's got an engaging plot, the ghosts are really good, I highly recommend it. It's got some sequels too. I think I have watched the second one, I don't fully remember it though. I just remember the first one was truly terrifying.
Come and play with us, Daddy.
The award for Creepiest Child was a no-brainer. It goes to Charlie from Hereditary, another Ari Aster film. This was Ari Aster's debut feature-length film actually. It follows a family who are grieving the death of their secretive grandmother, and that's all I'll really say about it, because if you haven't seen it then you really don't want to go in knowing a lot about it. It goes places you wouldn't expect it to go. It has one of the most outstanding performances by Toni Collette you'll ever see in your life. She should have won the Oscar, but we won't get into that. But anyway, Toni Collette's daughter in the film, Charlie, who's played by Millie Shapiro, is so creepy. She is the younger child in the family, and she was extremely close to the grandmother, and she is clearly struggling to come to terms with her grandmother's death. Shapiro's performance of Charlie was just so good, because you feel the sympathy for the girl while at the same time being so creeped out by her. She's going around chopping heads off birds, she's making this weird clucking sound throughout the film for no apparent reason, and her creepiness is explained by the end of the film, which I appreciate. I like that there was a reason for why she was acting the way she was. But yeah, you've probably seen Hereditary. It was massive. If you haven't, you have to watch it, and you have to try and watch it without knowing much about what happens.
Leave me alone! Jill, this is Sergeant Sacker. Listen to me. We've traced the call. It's coming from inside the house.
For best home invasion film, I've gone for Hush, which is a Mike Flanagan film. I love Mike Flanagan. I think he is one of the best horror directors we have around these days. I think Haunting of Hill House is a masterpiece, and I also have such a soft spot for Haunting of Bly Manor because that's what got me into him. I think a lot of people think his work verges on a bit too wholesome sometimes, but I love it. I love his monologues. I think he's great. But anyway, Hush came out in 2016 and follows a young writer called Maddie who is deaf and mute, and she lives in the middle of nowhere in these woods with just her cat. One night, a mass killer turns up at her house and begins to taunt and scare her, especially when he discovers that she can't hear. He becomes playing with her, and it is so terrifying. It was so terrifying to watch for the first time as well. I don't know if it holds up as well on rewatchability value, but for the first time watching it, I thought it was so well done, so scary. The sound design in it is really good because you're placed in the position as a viewer of Maddie, of not being able to rely on all your senses to help you get out of this just horrific situation. Maddie's a writer as well, and the film plays on that concept and leads the viewer down paths that make you believe something's happening, but it's actually Maddie's imagination of her coming up with ways in which you could get out. I just highly recommend if you've not seen it. It's really fun, but don't watch it if you're home alone one night. I wouldn't recommend that.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
For best jump scare, I'm going to pick Barbarian, which came out last year, and it's one of the best horror films I've seen in recent years. It was so flippin' scary, and this film is best to go into with as little information as you can. What I will tell you is it follows a woman who has a job interview out of town, so she has rented an Airbnb in this kind of deserted town, but when she arrives, there is already a man staying in the Airbnb, and it seems as though they've been double booked, but the man suggests that they can both share the Airbnb instead of one of them having to leave in the middle of the night and find somewhere else to stay. This film is such a wild ride. It takes you places you don't expect it to go. It's especially terrifying watching it as a woman because she's aware that she's in this terrifying experience that no woman would want to be in, but it's really good at always justifying the decisions she makes for like staying in the Airbnb with this stranger. I think one of the ways it achieves this is it casts Skarsgård, who plays Pennywise in It, as the man who is staying in the Airbnb as well. And I think as a viewer, you associate him with this classic horror movie villain, but at the same time he's acting really nice. He doesn't seem that threatening, but then again, she's walked into what is a very threatening situation to be in as a woman, and the film is just so good at playing up that so well and putting you on edge as a viewer of not knowing whether it's safe to trust this man, whether he is a nice guy or if he's pretending to be a nice guy. And that's just the start of the film as well. Like, the start of the film, the first like quarter of it is just so tense, and then it gets even wilder from there. I think it is absolutely brilliant, and it wins best jump scare because there is one specific jump scare that happens like near the end of the first act that really scares me. I also love the title of the film, Barbarian, because there's multiple people in the film who the title could be about, so it's quite fun to kind of think about who the barbarian of the film is. Just go watch it if you haven't seen it, it's so good.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
For best psychopath, I'm choosing Creep and Creep 2, its sequel. Creep is another found footage film series. The first one follows Aaron, who is hired by this strange, weird man named Joseph, who wants Aaron to film him and join him for the day because he's dying and he wants his unborn child to have footage of him to be able to look back on and know him as a father. This film is so good. I rewatched it recently with my sister, and I honestly could have gone into the comedy category as well, but I think it works so well as him as a psychopath. Mark Duplass's performance as the creep in the film is so unhinged and so weird, and you can just tell that he had such a good time playing this character. He manages to be so hilarious and so terrifying at the same time. For example, he has this wolf alter ego called Peach Fuzz, which takes over him whenever he dons the wolf mask that he has, and Aaron just kind of has to film him turn into this wolf doing weird dances. It is truly unhinged but hilarious, but also so unsettling at the same time. And Creep 2 is an amazing sequel, maybe even better than the first one, because the character who comes in the second film is a woman called Sarah, who, unlike Aaron, kind of decides to partake in Joseph's weirdness and embrace his creepiness and weirdness, and that really throws Joseph off kilter and kind of like makes him start questioning himself and his actions. It's such a good sequel because it has the essence still of what you loved in the first film, but it goes off in such a different direction. I recommend both so much. He is a great actor and such a great psychopath.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
The last film I'm going to talk about that needs exercise from my soul is Speak No Evil, which came out last year. This film is a real trip and a half. Speak No Evil follows a Danish couple and their child who meet a Dutch family whilst on holiday in Toscana. They become friends with the family, and a few months later the Dutch family invite them over to their house to stay with them for a weekend. They decide to go, but the Dutch family soon begin acting weird and start like testing their guests' limits for what they'll stand for, and the Danish family are frustratingly polite and go along with a lot of it before it starts becoming too much for them, but by that point they're in too deep. This film is definitely a slow burn. It's not boring at all. You kind of have to stick with it and go along for the ride. It's a psychological horror, and I think its goal is to kind of explore our people-pleasing tendencies and how far someone will go to make sure someone else feels comfortable, but it takes it so far. The ending is one of the most horrific, sinister endings to a film I've ever seen. You couldn't predict what happened at the end, like no way, and it was so disturbing to the point where I would say if you're gonna watch this film, go in when your mood is stable. Don't go in if you're feeling like not 100% on that day, because it will wreck you. It is truly sinister. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and you've maybe gotten some good suggestions for some horror films that you can watch this Halloween. I love all of these films. I think they're great, and I'll definitely be watching some of them towards the end of the month, but on my own. My husband will not be joining me. I'll maybe just get the dog to sit with me and I'll be okay. But yes, I hope you're doing so well. I hope you have a great upcoming week, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye!